I sold my silence for your future, son. Tonight, I'm buying my voice back. The radiator ticked like a metronome that had outlived its song. My hands, scarred where strings once bit, held the little guitar pick that hung from a tarnished chain. It was smooth from years against my chest, warm the way a word gets warm from being kept in the mouth too long. On the table lay the email I'd printed because paper makes truths heavier. Don't come to the auction. You're not our crowd. Marco didn't even sign it. The page whispered when I folded it, and something inside me answered low and steady, like a bass note under a choir. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. They'd already called that morning, Marco first, then Wesley taking the phone as if it were his right. There's an entrance donation, Wesley said, voice clipped, expensive. A buy-in. You want to help your son start life among people who matter, don't you? I could hear ice settling in their glasses, hear my boy breathing somewhere behind the bravado. I don't remember what I said. I remember what I didn't. I didn't remind him I'd sold my best guitar to keep Marco in school when his mother got sick. Didn't tell him I pawned the last amp the day the hospital wanted more than a hit record could offer. I just let the silence ride, a long note held clean. They took it for weakness. That's the thing about silence. Bullies hear it as surrender. The patient hear it as loading. I pressed the pick between thumb and forefinger and felt her there, my wife, laughing in some memory where the kitchen was bright and the coffee burned sweet. She'd say, "Don't punish the boy for his fear. Turn the fear into a stage light." So I shaved, slow and thorough, as if discipline itself were a kind of oath. Sewed a loose button on my jacket. Polished shoes until I saw some version of myself I could introduce to God without apology. By dusk, I stood across in the museum, a square of stone and glass where the city went to practice its reflections. The columns threw long shadows like a silent choir of judges. Every door breathed warm air and violin, Schubert, polite and moneyed. A poster by the steps showed a painting in a cracked frame. Restoration Fundraising Gala. Cracked things have their own kind of honesty. They don't pretend to be whole. I touched the pick and let the chain click once against my wedding band. Sound is memory. Memory is leverage. I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need speeches. Strategy is sometimes the art of letting your enemy audition for the villain he already is. I would go in, sit where they put me, pour my water with a steady hand, and watch what they valued most. In rooms like that, the loudest man is the emptiest glass. Inside, velvet and gold leaf and murmurs. A staffer checked names with a smile practice, so hard it had creases. "Sir," she said, eyes sliding over my thrift store lapels to the scuff on a shoe I'd missed. "Name." I gave it. The syllables sounded older than me. Her finger traveled down the list. Paused. A flicker. Hesitation. Training versus instinct. She leaned to a colleague. I heard the soft fizz of their shared breath, the clink of somewhere else champagne, the small ceremonial cough of money about to happen. Then a voice drifted down the marble stairs, bright as a blade. "Well," Wesley said, drawing out the word like silk through a ring, "if it isn't the museum's newest patron." He descended with a glass lifted chest high, the light catching his cufflinks like winks from a rigged roulette wheel. Marco trailed him. A good suit on a boy who used to wear my flannel to sleep. Our eyes met. His slid away as if I were the glare on a screen he needed to read. Wesley's smile never touched his pupils. He reached the podium of the check-in desk without looking at me. "He's with us," he told the staffer, tapping the guest list with a knuckle that wore a family crest. "But let's be mindful of optics." The staffer nodded, half bowing to a power that wasn't on her paycheck. "Seat him," Wesley said, not turning, not needing to, not in the front. "Put him with the strays." The chair creaked when I lowered myself into it, tucked behind a marble column, as if architecture itself wanted to hide me. They'd arranged the tables in concentric rings, radiating from the stage where the auctioneer would later swing his gavel like a scepter. At the core sat the patron's diamond wrists, lacquered hair, tuxedos so sharp they looked like blades pointed outward. My seat was at the far rim, where shadows thickened and stray coughs echoed. A server placed a half-filled glass of water in front of me. No wine. That small cruelty always tells the whole story. I let my hands fold around the stem of the glass. Not shaking, not desperate, just steady. My silence had been mistaken for shame. Tonight, it would be mistaken for patience, until patience turned into a weapon. From my vantage point, I could see Marco slip into a seat beside Wesley, shoulders square like a soldier marching under another man's flag. He didn't glance toward me. That cut deeper than the letter. A son ignoring his father is a quieter wound, but it bleeds longer. Around me sat others relegated to this colony of the unwanted. An elderly couple whispering over a catalog, a gallery in turn scribbling notes for someone who would never read them. We shared the kind of camaraderie you find in waiting rooms, separate lives joined by someone else's hierarchy. They kept sneaking glances at me, though, as if my presence in their exile puzzled them. Perhaps they sensed I hadn't been exiled but had walked here on purpose. A string quartet tuned, their bows scratching tentative questions into the air. I remembered nights when I was the answer, when rooms thrummed with my riffs and kids screamed my name like it was a password to freedom. I traded that roar for a single voice calling Daddy down a hallway. Some trades are worth the silence. Until your son forgets the value. The ceremony began. Lights softened to a warm hush, and the auctioneer, a man in tails with a face like polished oak, welcomed the distinguished company. His gaze swept the room, skating over me as if I were furniture. Wesley leaned toward Marco, whispered something, and Marco laughed too loudly, too rehearsed. Laughter can be another kind of leash. A toast was announced before dinner. Wesley rose with a flourish, lifting his champagne like a conductor signaling triumph. His voice carried across the hall with the ease of someone who had practiced contempt until it became performance art. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not only art itself, but the community that sustains it. This is not merely an auction. It is a filter, separating those who create legacies from those who merely linger." His eyes, sharp as razors, cut straight through the column to me. There was polite laughter, the kind that tastes like coins on the tongue. Marco smiled, hesitant, but it was there. That smile branded me more than Wesley's jab. My boy, collared by another man's applause. I sipped the water. Cool, flat, unbubbled. It reminded me of hospital nights when I prayed for one more day with her, when every choice was rationed like oxygen. I clenched the chain in my fist under the table until the edges of the pick bit my palm. Pain is just memory knocking for attention. As Wesley sat, he clinked glasses with Marco. The sound rang like a verdict. Around them, collectors murmured approval. They didn't know me, didn't need to. They were jurors who'd already voted guilty before the trial began. I leaned back, studying the chandeliers trembling from the quartet's crescendo. Let him enjoy his stage, I thought. The louder his arrogance grows, the sharper his fall will sound. What Wesley didn't know was that one man in this room still remembered the other stages I'd once commanded. And when his voice finally broke the silence, every glass in the hall would still. But for now, I waited, patient, unseen, while the trap wired itself tight. The soup course arrived in porcelain, so thin the candlelight bled through it. Silver spoons clinked in synchronized rhythm, a symphony of manners. I let mine cool untouched. Hunger wasn't in my stomach. It was in my bones, the kind that years of denial carve out when you've given everything to someone who now pretends not to know the cost. From across the hall, I watched Wesley hold court like a duke in borrowed skin. Every gesture screamed inheritance. Every smirk borrowed from the confidence of money that had never been earned. He leaned in close to Marco, speaking low, but his eyes made sure the room believed every word was gospel. I knew that trick, sell the whisper louder than the shout. It was the same technique I once used to turn a guitar riff into a revolution. I remembered another table, another night. Marco was 13, voice cracking like an old record, asking if I'd be at a school recital. Of course, I'd said, wiping grease from my hands after yet another day loading crates to pay bills. I sold out arenas once, and now I sold my back just to keep him in braces and sneakers. The recital ticket still hides in my wallet, frayed like a warning. He played well that night. I clapped until my palms stung, even when the auditorium was nearly empty. Funny how history repeats itself. The father in shadows, the son pretending not to see. The auctioneer began presenting the first pieces. Paintings with pedigrees longer than royal bloodlines. Sculptures sealed in glass coffins. Paddles rose and fell like wings of birds too heavy to fly. Numbers vied across the room. Each bit another stone added to the wall between me and them. But I wasn't here to climb their wall. I was here to bring one of their own tumbling down from it. At my table, the intern scribbled faster, glancing up at Wesley's table with open envy. I caught her eye once, and she blinked quickly, embarrassed. People sense things when hierarchy blinds them. They sense who doesn't belong, but also who waits with purpose. She turned back to her notes, cheeks flushed, as if she'd brushed against electricity. When the second course came, Wesley stood again, glass in hand. Art, he announced, is not charity. It thrives on merit, not on the pity of stragglers. Tonight we separate true patrons from nostalgia's ghosts. He paused just long enough for laughter to ripple, then added, "This is not a shelter for tired names of yesterday." His gaze fixed on me like a spotlight no one else could see. Marco lowered his head, jaw tight. I wanted to believe it was shame. But shame can bend two ways, toward repentance or deeper into denial. My grip on the chain in my pocket tightened. I could almost hear her voice. "Stay calm, Randall. You would not by shouting louder, but by outlasting their noise." She was right. Always had been. Strategy wasn't about striking first. It was about knowing the exact second when silence turns lethal. The auctioneer rapped his gavel gently, calling for order. Wesley sat down to applause that scratched my ears like static. But I noticed something. A man across the room, silver hair, tailored suit, not laughing. He leaned forward, studying me, recognition flickering in his eyes like an old tape catching the light. His lips moved around my name, though no sound came. Ross. It had been decades since I'd seen him, back when record deals were inked on napkins and sweat instead of contracts. He had been a producer once, then disappeared into the world of collectors. And here he was now, eyes narrowing, piecing together the ruin and the legend sitting behind the column. I set down my spoon. The hall buzzed with shallow chatter, oblivious. They thought tonight was about money. But I knew the truth. It was about memory. And memory has a sharper edge than any gavel. Ross shifted in his chair, preparing to stand. And in that instant, I realized the silence I had carried all evening was about to detonate. Ross rose slowly, the way a man stands when he knows every eye will follow. He didn't raise a glass, didn't clear his throat, didn't smile for the cameras of the rich. He simply placed his napkin on the table and let the hush ripple outward. Even the quartet faltered mid-phrase, strings hanging unresolved. "Excuse me," he said, voice seasoned by decades of boardrooms and backstage. "I believe the evening has overlooked something, or rather, someone." The chandeliers trembled from the sudden shift in air. Wesley, mid-laugh, stiffened. Marco glanced at him for guidance, like a child caught between parents in a quarrel. He didn't understand. Ross stepped into the circle of light, and with each step the tension braided tighter. "I see familiar faces here," Ross continued. "Patrons of culture, defenders of art. But do you know," he turned slowly, scanning the room, "that among us sits a man whose music once carried more weight than the walls of this museum?" A murmur spread, the kind of murmur money hates. Curiosity it cannot control. Ross pointed, not rudely, but directly toward the column where I sat. My table mates shifted, chairs scraping as if to make room for history itself. My throat felt dry, but I kept still. Silence was still my strategy. "Randall," Ross said, and the name cracked the hall like thunder rolling through velvet. The man who sold out stadiums in the 70s, who walked away from fame not because he failed, but because he chose love over the machine. Do you remember the ballad that funded a children's wing in Detroit? Or the tour he canceled when his wife fell ill, selling every instrument to cover hospital bills? Heads swiveled. Forks froze midair. A few collectors muttered recognition, recalling vinyl sleeves, posters yellowed with time. The weight of forgotten memory pressed down on the laughter that had just filled the hall. Wesley's smile curdled, but he attempted bravado. "Legends are cheap currency, Ross. We deal in the present. Randall is..." Ross cut him off, sharper than any gavel. Randall is the reason some of you even sit here. Half the trust funds in this room grew fat on royalties from records he helped shape. He sacrificed what none of you ever would. You call that poverty? The silence that followed was heavier than any applause could have been. And then applause came, not hesitant, but building like a storm gaining speed. Collectors, donors, even the interns clapped, rising like waves. I sat unmoving, the pick biting my palm, eyes stinging not from shame now, but from something closer to vindication. Marco looked around, startled, his lips parted as if to argue, but no words came. The tide was shifting beneath him, pulling him away from Wesley's dock. I caught Wesley stare across the room, his jaw tight, his glass trembling though he tried to hide it. A man unaccustomed to losing the spotlight was watching it slip from his fingers. And he knew I wasn't even the one taking it. His own arrogance had lit the fuse. Ross raised his hand for quiet. True art isn't measured in donations or seats at the front table. It's measured in sacrifice and love, in what you give away when no one is watching. Randall embodies that. Remember him. Honor him. The applause roared again, echoing off the stone like an anthem. I let it wash over me without rising, without bowing, just steady as the shadow I had been all night. But I knew this wasn't the end. Ross had cracked the mask. The crowd had turned. Yet pride is a cornered beast, and Wesley wasn't done. From across the hall, I saw his hand grip Marco's shoulder, fingers digging in, his lips bent to my son's ear, whispering something venomous. Marco's face blanched, confusion warring with loyalty. And in that split second I realized the real battle had only just begun. The applause still rang in the chandeliers when Wesley leaned into Marco's ear, venom dripping so quietly only the boy could hear. But I knew that posture. I'd seen managers whisper contracts that looked like lifelines but were nooses. Wesley's hand was heavy on Marco's shoulder, steering him like a pawn across a board only he could see. Marco's jaw tightened. He nodded too quickly, like a man drowning who mistakes the rope for rescue. My chest ached, not from age, but from a memory of the child who once wrapped his arms around my neck at concerts, declaring me louder than any crowd. That boy was still inside him, but Wesley had wrapped silence around him like chains. Ross returned to his seat, but the damage was done. The hall no longer belonged to Wesley. Collectors leaned toward me, murmuring, their curiosity rekindled. A woman in pearls whispered my name as if it were a song she'd half remembered. Respect was creeping back into the room, slow and undeniable, like dawn through heavy curtains. Dinner plates were cleared, replaced with crystal goblets and gilded menus. The air was thick with truffle and expectation. The auctioneer struck the gavel lightly to command attention. "We continue," he said, voice of velvet hammer. Next piece, a portrait in a fractured frame. Symbol of survival. The painting glowed on stage, a family depicted with eyes that seemed to know secrets. The frame, cracked down one side, caught the light like a scar. I couldn't look away. Scars are proof that something broken decided to keep existing anyway. My own family carried its scar right there in the hall. My son clinging to the wrong hand, my absence etched across his loyalty. Wesley raised his paddle first, voice booming. 100,000. Laughter followed, forced, nervous. He wanted the room back. He wanted to prove that applause couldn't replace authority. Another collector countered. Then another. Numbers leapt like fire. All the while Wesley's jaw worked, his smile too sharp. His ego demanded triumph tonight, and I could see him betting everything on spectacle. I stayed silent, sipping my flat water, letting the shadows around me thicken. A storm doesn't announce itself until the first crack of lightning. Marco's eyes found mine across the distance. For the first time that night, he didn't look away immediately. He studied me uncertain, as if weighing two truths in either hand. The man Wesley painted as a relic, and the father Ross had revealed as a sacrifice. His lips parted, but he said nothing. That silence was louder than all the bids. The painting sold for more than I'd earned in 2 decades of work. The gavel fell. Applause fluttered polite. Wesley lifted his chin, claiming victory even though he wasn't the highest bidder. The massive arrogance was back, but now it looked brittle, desperate. Then came the interlude, music swelling, waiters weaving with dessert trays, the hall restless with gossip. I felt the shift. Power in the room was no longer centralized. It moved, searching for where to land. Wesley rose suddenly, glass raised once more. His tone sharpened, each word designed to slice. We all love a good story, don't we? But nostalgia has a way of blinding us. Legends belong in vinyl sleeves, not among visionaries shaping the future. Tonight is about merit, not martyrdom. His gaze stabbed toward me, daring me to rise. The hall stiffened. Guests glanced between us, sensing the duel beneath the silk. Marco's hand trembled around his glass. He wanted to speak, I could see it, but fear glued him silent. I set my glass down gently, the clink of metronome counting down. I felt the chain in my pocket, edges digging deeper now. Every humiliation, every sacrifice, every silence pressed into that one small pick. I breathed once, steady, and I knew the moment was coming when silence would end, when my voice, honed by loss and patience, would finally cut to the hall like a rift no one could ignore. But first, I had to let Wesley believe he'd won. Let him climb higher, because the higher the stage, the harder the fall. Dessert plates clattered softly, the sound brittle as nerves. Candied fruits, glazed chocolate towers, sweetness staged as luxury. No one tasted them. The hall hummed with unease, an orchestra of coughs and shifting chairs. Wesley's words still hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I sat motionless, hands folded, the pick pressing against my palm to the pocket. I thought of her again, my wife, how she once told me, there's more power in letting a fool speak than in silencing him. He'll dig his own grave if you just hand him the shovel. Tonight, Wesley was already elbow deep in dirt. Ross leaned back, sipping wine, his eyes on me. He knew what I was doing. He had been in those green rooms, back when promoters tried to rob us blind. He'd watch me sit silent, then deliver one phrase that burned their lives to ash. He recognized strategy now, not weakness. The auctioneer tapped his gavel, calling the room back to order. Next lot, he announced, a rare violin, late 18th century. Its resonance is said to carry the sorrow of every hand that played it. He gestured toward the instrument, spotlighted in glass. The bow lay across it like a resting blade. The irony hit me in the chest. Sorrow in wood and string, preserved because someone decided pain was valuable when varnished. I had sold instruments once too, but not for preservation. I sold them for survival. No glass case, no applause, just hospital invoices and the desperate will of the father. Bidding began. Numbers soared. Voices clashed. The violin climbed into the hundreds of thousands. Each shout of a price sounded to me like another accusation. This is what your sacrifice was worth. Randall, if only you kept it. Marco shifted uneasily at Wesley's table. I caught his glance again. Longer this time. Something inside him was bending, like a beam straining under too much weight. His lips pressed in. Wesley leaned close, whispering poison. Marco nodded, but slower now. The obedience cracked. Finally, the gavel fell. The violin was claimed by a faceless man with a banker's smile. Applause trickled, weak and fatigued. The hall was no longer amused. Tension wrapped the air too tight. Wesley rose again. His glass caught the chandelier light, sparkling like false virtue. What a fine example, he declared, of sacrifice becoming treasure in the right hands. But let's not pretend all sacrifices have value. Some are simply mistakes, choices made by men too weak to play the long game. His eyes found me, sharp, taunting. Gasps rustled through the room. He had gone too far. Even those who'd laughed earlier winced now. The insult was naked, cruel, unmasked. Marco froze, face pale. His hand twitched toward the table, as if he wanted to rise, to object. But fear anchored him. My son was trapped in the glare of another man's arrogance. I inhaled slowly, tasting the moment. The chain was warm against my skin. My wife's voice echoed. No when it turned silence into thunder. I pushed my chair back. The scrape cut the air like a bow across taut strings. Heads turned. Murmurs fell silent. Wesley's smirk faltered just for an instant. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Funny thing about mistakes. I said, words carrying in the hush. They teach the ones who made them how to endure. And endurance. I let the pause sharpen. Outlast arrogance every time. A ripple went through the room. Not applause yet. Something heavier. Expectation. Ross set his glass down with a sharp click, eyes gleaming. The collectors leaned forward. Even the auctioneer stilled, gavel hovering midair. Wesley laughed brittle. A philosopher now? Shall we auction off your wisdom too? Or perhaps your silence? But the laughter didn't follow this time. The crowd had tasted blood in the water, and they were no longer on his side. Marco's gaze snapped between us, between the man he feared and the father he betrayed. And in that electric moment, I knew the battle lines were drawn. The next move would shatter something, his pride, my silence, or the fragile bond with my son. The gavel struck once, sharp as a heartbeat. The hall waited. The echo of the gavel still rang in the marble, sharp as a rifle shot. Every head turned toward me. The chandeliers quivered with a hush, as if the glass itself leaned in to hear. I stayed standing. My hands rested lightly on the back of my chair, steady, calm, though my chest hammered like a drumline. Years of holding back words, on stage, backstage, in hospital corridors, had taught me that the longer you delay the note, the more explosive the release. Endurance. I repeated softly, letting the syllables travel. That's what separates art from spectacle. You can buy the room, Wesley, but you can't buy time. And time is the one critic none of us can silence. A stir. The kind that runs through a crowd when they sense something genuine, something unrehearsed. Ross nodded slightly, lips pressed in satisfaction. Wesley chuckled too loudly, sloshing champagne. Poetry from the discount seats. Tell me, Randall, do you plan to pay your entrance fee with memories? Perhaps sing us one of those forgotten songs? A relic has no currency here. He wanted laughter. What he got was unease. Collectors glanced at each other, unsure whether to follow him. A few who had applauded earlier now studied the rims of their glasses. I stepped out from behind the column. The light caught me full for the first time that evening. My jacket was plain, my shoes scuffed, but the silence in the room was crown enough. I laid the pick and chain gently on the linen before me, the metal gleaming faintly. This, I said, tapping it once, was the last thing I kept when I sold my instruments. Sold them not for luxury, not for status, but for survival, for my boy. I let my eyes find Marco's, holding them. Every chord I ever played, every tour I ever walked away from, was for him. A collective intake of breath. The story Ross had hinted at was no longer myth. It stood living in front of them. Wesley's face tightened, but he forced a smile. A tragic little token, he sneered. But we are not here to romanticize poverty. We are here to invest in legacy. I straightened. Sacrifice is legacy. Not the numbers on a ledger, not the wine in your glass. When you've given until there's nothing left but silence, and still you give, that's when art survives. Applause broke, scattered at first, then swelling. A standing ovation from the edges of the hall, the very tables Wesley dismissed as irrelevant. The sound rolled forward like a wave, crashing against the core of his supporters. Marco's hands twitched. He didn't clap, not yet, but his eyes were wet. He mouthed something I almost caught. Dad. For the first time all night, Wesley looked uncertain. His smirk cracked, the mask slipping. He slammed his glass down too hard, liquid spilling onto the tablecloth. The applause thundered, rising higher, drowning his attempt to recover. Even the auctioneer let the gavel rest, watching me with a respect that hadn't been in his eyes an hour ago. I didn't bow. I didn't smile. I simply let the room decide for itself who carried weight and who carried noise. And then Wesley did something desperate. He grabbed Marco's arm, yanking him to his feet, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. My fiancé's brother, he announced loudly, is impressionable. Forgive him if he seems moved by old fairy tales. He'll learn that heritage isn't built on tears. It's built on power. Gasps cut through the ovation. Marco pulled his arm back, face pale. In that instant, the hall no longer saw Wesley as confident. They saw him as cornered. And a cornered man is the most dangerous of all. The air vibrated with tension. My son stood between two legacies, one bought with arrogance, the other forged in sacrifice. And I knew the next word spoken would either save him or shatter him. Marco stood rigid, torn between the iron grip of Wesley's hand and the weight of my gaze. The chandeliers hummed above, their crystals trembling with the whispers racing through the hall. This wasn't just an auction anymore. It was a stage, and the performance had shifted. I didn't move closer. Distance was my weapon. From where I stood, my voice carried like an echo across the marble. Power without sacrifice, I said, is just theater. And theater ends when the curtain falls. Legacy, I touched the chain on the table, is what remains when the lights go out. The word struck something in Marco. His jaw quivered. He looked down at Wesley's fingers digging into his sleeve, then back at me. That tiny hesitation was louder than thunder. It said he was no longer sure who to obey. Ross seized the moment. Rising to his feet again, he addressed the crowd with authority only truth can grant. You all saw it. Randall gave away his fame, his fortune, his very instruments to save his family. That kind of man doesn't fade. He defines what endures. Compare that to... His eyes flicked to Wesley, sharp as a blade. To men who inherit stages but can't hold them without tearing others down. The room shifted audibly. Collectors straightened. Pearl necklaces stiffened. Forks rested untouched. You could feel the air tilting, alliances unraveling thread by thread. Wesley barked a laugh, brittle. We are not here for bedtime stories. We are here for the future of art. And art is not charity for washed-up musicians with sob stories. Art is survival of the fittest. I stepped fully into the light now, every scar, every wrinkle visible. Then by that definition, I said quietly, I'm the fittest man in this room. The silence before the applause was sharp as a blade. Then it came, eruption, spontaneous, unchoreographed. The intern at my old table clapped first, then others followed, building until the hall thundered. It wasn't polite applause anymore. It was rebellion against the arrogance that had ruled their evening. Wesley's face drained. He hissed something into Marco's ear, but this time my son shoved his hand away. Chairs screeched as people rose, clapping, whistling even. The quartet, unsure, plucked a few jubilant notes, swept into the tide. And then silence again, sudden and complete. Because Marco had spoken. His voice cracked, but it carried. You lied to me. The crowd froze. Wesley gaped at him. Marco's hand shook, but his spine was straight. You told me my father was a burden, that he was nothing. But you knew what he gave up for me. He looked at me, tears rimmed in firelight. Dad, The words caught, heavy with years of swallowed shame. The hall leaned in. Wesley lunged, grabbing Marco's shoulder again, snarling low, careful. But too late, the crowd had seen it. The predator's mask had fallen. What was once charisma now looked like control. Gasps spread like sparks. The collectors, the donors, the staff, they weren't watching an air at an auction anymore. They were watching a man unravel. Ross's voice cut the tension like steel. There it is, the truth. One man's sacrifice versus another's manipulation. All eyes locked on Wesley. I breathed deep, the chain warm against my palm. The trap had sprung, but vengeance is sweetest when it's public. And in that moment, under the chandeliers and the fractured frame on stage, I knew the first crack in Wesley's empire had just broken wide open. Wesley's smile returned, but now it twitched at the edges, a mask glued too fast to stay straight. He raised his glass high, as if volume alone could drown out the truth. Drama, he barked, forcing laughter. A touching little family play for the cheap seats. But let us remember, this is an auction, not a confessional. The words clattered hollow in the air. No echo, no support. The collectors didn't laugh this time. They glanced at one another uneasy, as though realizing they'd applauded the wrong actor. Marco's breath shook. He stepped closer to me, hesitation melting with each stride. Dad, he whispered, voice breaking enough for the front tables to hear. I'm sorry. The apology pierced sharper than any insult Wesley had hurled. My throat tightened, but I stayed still. A man doesn't snatch at redemption. He lets it walk to him on its own legs. Wesley saw it happening, saw his grip slipping. He slammed his glass down. Shards of crystal sprang across linen. Enough. His voice cracked, raw. You think sacrifice makes you noble? It makes you weak. Weak men sell their guitars. Weak men bury themselves in poverty, weak men. He turned to Marco, spittle shining at his lips. Ray's son's too blind to see failure. Gasps tore through the room. Even the quartet stopped mid-phrase, bows hovering. That wasn't charm anymore. That was cruelty naked, unmasked. Ross rose again, calm as a judge. And now you've shown us who you truly are. Not a patron, not a visionary. Just a coward who builds his pride on breaking others. Applause thundered again, stronger, angrier, fueled not by nostalgia but by disgust. A public humiliation blooming, unstoppable. Wesley tried to laugh it off, but sweat beaded at his temple. He reached for Marco again, desperate to reclaim authority. My son recoiled, shoving him back hard enough that chairs toppled. The sound cracked through the hall, louder than the gavel itself. And there it was, the second public fracture. Not only had Wesley lost the crowd, he had lost control of the boy he thought was chained. Marco turned to me fully now. I should have seen it. All those years you were there and his voice broke. I chose him. The pain in his words was raw, jagged. I wanted to tell him he was forgiven, but this wasn't the moment for tenderness. The hall still vibrated with judgment, with the predator exposed. Wesley staggered, pale with fury, pointing at me. You planned this. You and Ross. A stunt to embarrass me. His words tumbled wild, no longer precise, no longer polished. The man who once manipulated rooms with smirk was now flailing, drowning. The auctioneer rapped the gavel sharply, trying to restore order, but the noise only magnified the chaos. Collectors whispered, staff froze. The violin on stage gleamed under its glass as if mocking the discord. I placed my hand over the pick on the table. The cool metal steadied me. Patience. Her voice echoed again. Wait for the silence. That's when truth hits hardest. The silence came like a curtain drop. Wesley panting. The crowd glaring, Marco trembling between us. I lifted my glass of water, not wine, never wine, and spoke clearly. Legacy isn't bought. It's lived. And tonight, every person here just saw whose legacy will last. The ovation erupted, fierce and unyielding. Wesley's face crumpled in fury. His grip on the night shattered beyond repair. But I knew it wasn't finished. He wouldn't leave humiliated without one last strike. And when that strike came, it would either destroy me or destroy him. Wesley's face had gone a shade too pale for his smile to hold. The applause washed over him like acid, peeling the charm away until only raw anger glared out. He shoved his chair back, the screech echoing against marble. You think this ends with applause? He spat, voice cracking like glass. Crowds are fickle. They cheer you today. They forget you tomorrow. Randall, your time is ash. And you, he stabbed a trembling finger at Marco, you'll crawl back when you realize respect doesn't pay the rent. The hall recoiled. Collectors leaned away from him as though his fury carried a stench. Even the servers froze, silver trays hovering midair. Marco straightened. His voice trembled, but it cut through. I don't need your money, Wesley. Not if it costs my soul. The words came like a blade slipped free of its sheath. Gasps rippled. This was the fracture they'd been waiting for. The son's rejection, the air slipping through his fingers. Ross stood again, steady as a monument. There is nothing more public than truth, he said. And tonight truth has stripped you bare. Wesley's laugh was manic now. He seized the auctioneer's gavel from its block, brandishing it like a weapon. Truth. His voice boomed wild. Truth is who holds a hammer. Truth is who commands silence when they strike. The hall erupted in shouts, chairs scraping back. The gavel trembled in his hand, not power but panic. He banged it against the podium once, twice, each crack desperate, not authoritative. The very symbol of order had become his meltdown. I stepped forward, unflinching. The shadows that had hidden me were gone. Light cut across my face as I spoke low, each word precise. That hammer doesn't crown you, Wesley. It condemns you. A murmur surged, rising into applause again, louder, harder, each clap like nails in his coffin. Wesley's arm sagged. The gavel slipped from his grip, clattering to the floor with a hollow sound that rang like judgment. Marco bent, picked it up, not for Wesley, but for himself. He held it steady, then set it back on the block with care. The gesture was quiet, symbolic. Authority restored order, not arrogance. The crowd cheered, but I didn't cheer. My eyes stayed locked on Wesley, watching the twitch in his jaw, the desperate fire in his eyes. Humiliation had stripped him, but humiliation alone doesn't kill men like him. It makes them reckless. He leaned toward me, voice low, feral, just for my ears. You may have won their claps, old man, but you haven't won him. Not yet. The boy is still cracked, and cracks break. I held his gaze, silent, because silence is sharper than any retort. And in that silence, I let him feel the truth. His stage was gone, his mask shattered, his audience turned. The hall was no longer his arena. It was his prison. And yet, in the back of my mind, I braced, because cornered beasts lash hardest just before the end. The room still vibrated with applause, but beneath it, I heard something else. An animal rasp in Wesley's breathing, the sound of a man who had lost everything yet refused to fall alone. His cufflinks glinted as he gripped the edge of the podium, knuckles white, jaw locked. Marco stood a few feet away, chest rising fast, his eyes darting between me and Wesley. The boy was torn, but the tether had snapped. You could see in the way he no longer flinched from my gaze. Wesley saw it too. That loss was the deepest cut. He leaned forward, his voice pitched low, ragged, meant for me but carried by the marble walls. You think sacrifice makes you noble, but sacrifice leaves scars, and scars make men bitter. Admit it, Randall. You resent him. You gave your life for your son, and he spat it back in your face. That's the truth you won't sing. The crowd stirred, whispers flickering like sparks. Wesley had shifted his attack, no longer mocking, but trying to poison. I steadied my breath, fingers brushing the chain in my pocket. The pick was warm, edges biting my skin, memory pressing into flesh. Don't let him define the silence. Her voice echoed. Use it. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until only the podium stood between predator and prey. My words came low, deliberate. I don't resent my son. I resent the men who taught him to be ashamed of love. Applause cracked again, sudden, fierce. Marco's had dropped, tears catching in the light. He was hearing the verdict not from the crowd, but from me. Wesley's lips peeled back in something between a grin and a snarl. Touching, but it won't last. Forgiveness is fragile. When the night ends, he'll remember the comfort I offered, not the sacrifices you buried in the dark. Ross's voice cut through, cold steel. No, Wesley. When the night ends, he'll remember who stood exposed, clutching a gavel like a weapon, trembling before a man he tried to bury. The hall murmured assent. Wesley tried to straighten, but his shoulders sagged. His empire of charm was rubble now, and the audience had switched from allies to witnesses. Marco took a step toward me. Just one, but it was enough. Enough to make Wesley's hand lash out, grasping for him again. This time Marco shoved it away violently, the movement echoing like a door slamming shut. The crowd gasped. A third humiliation, public and irreversible. The narrative was sealed. I lifted the glass of water, held it high. The silence thickened, waiting. To those who measure art in money, I said, remember this. Art is what survives after money is spent. And sacrifice is the signature on that survival. Applause exploded, deafening, filling every vaulted arch of the museum. Wesley staggered back, eyes wide, chest heaving. He was finished, and he knew it. But in that wild gleam behind his fury, I saw what came next. The desperate lunge of a man who'd rather set fire to the stage than bow to defeat. The gavel still rested heavy on the block. Ross steady at my side. Marco trembling but free. The pieces were in place. And I understood the final act was about to begin. The ovation faded into a heavy hush, the kind that makes even marble breathe slower. Wesley stood alone at the podium, sweat darkening the edges of his collar, his pupils wide with rage. The hall had turned into a tribunal, and every face was a juror staring at a guilty man. But humiliation only sharpened his madness. He leaned forward, gripping the podium as though he could anchor himself by splinters. His voice, low but cutting, carried, "You applaud sacrifice, but you'll forget him tomorrow. That's what crowds do. They move on. And when they do, he'll still be nothing but an old man in a rented jacket." A ripple of disapproval passed through the tables. Even collectors who once courted him shifted in their seats, ashamed to be tethered to his bitterness. Marco stepped toward me, his voice strained but steady. "He's not nothing. He's my father." The words cracked the hall wider than any gavel strike. Gasps, murmurs, nods. Marco's confession was a bridge rebuilt in the open air. I felt my chest ache, not from hurt, but from the sudden weight of a bond reforged. Wesley's face contorted. He spun on Marco, pointing with shaking fury. "You ungrateful little fool. I gave you access. I gave you status." "No!" Marco cut in, louder than I'd ever heard him. "You gave me shame. You taught me to hate the man who gave me everything." The silence that followed was a blade's edge. Every eye in the hall watched, rapt. Wesley had been unmasked. Now he was unraveling. Ross stood, calm as a judge pronouncing sentence. "Wesley, your stage is gone. You paraded cruelty as culture, arrogance as art. But art doesn't bow to arrogance. It devours it." The hall erupted into applause once more, stronger, angrier. Wesley staggered, his composure gone. He slammed his hand on the podium, the echo hollow, desperate. My own voice rose, not loud, but steady, carried by the architecture itself. "You asked me to pay an entrance fee tonight. I've already paid mine in love, in sacrifice, in silence. That's a currency no gavel can measure." The collectors rose to their feet, clapping, some shouting my name, others pounding the tables. It wasn't politeness anymore, it was allegiance. Wesley's chest heaved, his shoulders jerking like a man drowning. He reached for the gavel again, hand trembling, eyes wild. But when his fingers closed on it, no power came. The crowd had stripped its authority away. He was just a man holding wood, nothing more. Marco stepped to his side, not with obedience but defiance. He pulled the gavel from Wesley's hand and set it back on the block, deliberate, symbolic. The audience cheered, the sound rolling like thunder. For the first time all evening, I allowed myself a breath that wasn't measured. My son had chosen. The tide had turned. But even as victory settled over the hall, I saw the fire still burning in Wesley's eyes. Humiliated men don't walk quietly into defeat. They claw, they bite, they drag others with them into the dark. And in that moment, under the fractured frame and the trembling chandeliers, I knew the night still had one more reckoning waiting. The chandeliers quivered as if they, too, felt the charge in the air. Marco's words still echoed. "He's my father," a confession that had split the hall wide open. But Wesley didn't crumble. He straightened, shoulders trembling with rage, and his eyes locked on me with fire that burned past humiliation into something darker. He pointed across the room, voice hoarse. "This isn't over. You think applause makes you righteous? You think sentiment makes you strong? No. Strength is control. Strength is making others kneel." The crowd hissed, some outright booing. A woman in pearls muttered, shameful, loud enough to be heard. Wesley flinched, but his pride wouldn't let him retreat. He slammed his palm on the podium so hard the microphone squealed. "You'll all regret siding with a relic." I stepped closer, my footsteps deliberate on the marble, each one erasing the distance between us. My voice, when it came, was low but steady, riding the silence. "Relics endure, Wesley. That's why they're in museums. The flashy new trinkets." I gestured to the hall. "They fade." Applause rolled again, sharp, immediate. Wesley's face tightened, veins standing at his temple. He turned on Marco, desperate, clawing for any hold. "And you don't think this saves you? Without me, you're nothing. Your father can't buy your way into these rooms." Marco's reply was calm, cutting. "I don't want these rooms. Not if they cost me him." He stepped closer to me. A wall of distance finally crossed. The crowd roared. People rose to their feet, clapping, some shouting my name. 3 times Wesley had been broken in public now. Mocked by Ross's revelation, abandoned by the crowd, rejected by Marco. Each wound deepened the last. But humiliation didn't drain him. It twisted him. His hands gripped the edge of the podium, white-knuckled, eyes darting like a cornered animal. His voice dropped, venomous. "You'll regret this, both of you. I'll burn this night into ash before I let it crown you." Ross's voice sliced through, firm, commanding. "Enough. You've lost, Wesley. Dignity would demand you leave." But dignity had abandoned him hours ago. Wesley snatched a fractured frame painting from its stand, holding it high. The crowd gasped as the antique would groan in his hands. "This," he snarled, "is what your sacrifice amounts to. Broken frames, empty relics." The audience shouted, some rising in alarm. Guards stepped forward, but hesitated. No one wanted to stain the gala with chaos. I felt the chain in my pocket, the pick biting into my palm. The mirror of symbols stood clear before me. He held a fractured frame. I held a relic of sacrifice. 2 objects, 2 legacies, clashing in a hall that suddenly felt like a court. Marco reached toward him, horrified. "Don't!" Wesley's grin twisted. "Watch me." And in that instant, as he raised the frame high, I knew the moment of final reckoning had arrived. The night would not end with words alone. It would end with action that carved truth into stone. The hall froze as Wesley lifted the fractured frame above his head, veins straining in his neck, a grotesque parody of triumph. The chandeliers caught the crackwood in their light, and for a moment it looked less like art and more like a weapon. Gasps rippled through the room, fear and disbelief mingling. Marco surged forward, hands outstretched. "Stop." His voice cracked, desperate. But Wesley shoved him back with a snarl, eyes burning only for me. "You think sacrifice gives you power?" he shouted, his voice unhinged, echoing off the stone. "Then let's see how your symbols survive when they're smashed to dust." The crowd stirred, voices rising, some pleading, some jeering, but no one moved closer. No one but me. I stepped forward, slow, steady. My shoes struck the marble like a drumbeat. Each step cut through the chaos until the room seemed to pulse with the rhythm. My hand slipped into my pocket, fingers tightening around the pick on its chain. "Careful, Wesley," I said, my voice calm but heavy enough to still the noise. "That frame isn't the only thing cracked in your hands." He sneered, grip tightening on the wood. Empty words from an empty man. "No," I said, pulling the chain free so the pick gleamed under chandeliers. "This is what you'll never have. Not applause, not money, not power. This." I lifted it high, the crowd's eyes following. Sacrifice. Love. The kind of legacy no hammer, no arrogance, no broken frame can erase. The silence that fell was suffocating, electric. Every gaze flicked between my hand and his, between the relic of love and the artifact of ruin. Wesley's snarl faltered, just for a heartbeat. The applause that had haunted him, the loyalty he had lost, the son who had slipped from his grasp, all of it pressed down in that instant. And for the first time, he looked less like a man and more like a shadow stretched too thin. Marco stepped to my side now, shoulders squared, his hand brushing mine as if to anchor himself. "You can't win, Wesley," he said, his voice trembling but firm. "Not tonight." The crowd erupted, cheers, claps, shouts of enough. Guards moved closer, confidence surging with the crowd's verdict. Wesley roared, lifting the frame higher, intent on shattering it, on shattering me. But his hand trembled, though it shook in his grasp. The room no longer looked at him with awe. It looked at him with pity, and pity was the one weight he could not carry. The frame slipped, crashing down onto the marble. The crackle echoed like thunder, shards scattering across the stage. Gasps turned to silence, then to murmurs, then to applause, relentless and final. Wesley stumbled back, eyes wide, as though the very floor had betrayed him. His weapon was gone. His mask was gone. And before the judgment of 100 eyes, he stood with nothing left. I lowered the chain into Marco's palm, closing his fingers around it. This, I whispered, is what endures. The crowd surged to their feet, clapping, shouting my name, drowning Wesley's ragged breath. But I knew the night wasn't done yet. Broken men lash hardest when the world refuses to carry their weight. And Wesley was far from finished with his fall. The fractured frame lay shattered on the marble, its splinters glinting like shards of crown torn from a false king. The sound of its collapse still reverberated when the hall erupted into thunder, cheers, stomps, applause that rattled the very columns. But through the roar, I watched Wesley. He didn't collapse. He didn't retreat. He stood swaying, eyes wild, chest heaving like a beast cornered by torches. His hands clawed the air as if searching for something to anchor him, but all he found was emptiness. The applause wasn't his anymore. It was mine. Ours. Marco stood beside me, the chain clenched in his fist, his shoulders straight at last. The boy who once hid behind shame now stood in the light. I placed a hand on his shoulder, steady, grounding. His tears gleamed, but his spine was steel. Wesley's laugh broke the noise, jagged and hollow. "You think this is victory?" he spat, spinning toward the crowd. "You think an old man's relic and a boy's apology mean anything? Your sheep applauding sentiment while power slips away from you." The crowd booed, some shouting for him to leave. Ross stood tall, his voice booming. "Enough, Wesley. You've been unmasked. The night belongs to truth now." Wesley whirled on him, face twisted. "Truth." He jabbed a finger toward me. "His truth is failure. He abandoned fame. He sold his instruments. I cut him off, stepping forward, voice calm but sharp as a blade. "I gave them up. For love. For family. That's what you'll never understand. Wesley, you confuse sacrifice with weakness because you've never loved anything enough to bleed for it." The hall exploded again. Cheers, whistles, even stomps of feet against marble. Wesley flinched as if each cheer were a stone hurled at him. Marco turned on him, voice clear. "You used me. You made me ashamed of my father. But all along, the shame was yours." The words hit like a verdict. Gasps, then nods, then applause anew. Wesley staggered back, pale, sweating, his empire crumbling around him. But his eyes, those eyes still burned. He wasn't finished. He lunged suddenly, grabbing the gavel again, holding it aloft like a blade of authority reclaimed. His voice tore through the hall, cracked but desperate. "I am the future. I hold the hammer." The room froze, breathless. Even the applause choked off. Every eye fixed on him, on the hollow man clinging to wood, as though it could crown him again. I stepped forward, closing the last space between us, my shadow falling across his. My voice dropped to a whisper that carried like thunder. "No, Wesley, the hammer doesn't make you the future. It makes you the past." And with that, Marco reached out, took the gavel from his hands, not by force, but by calm certainty. Wesley didn't resist. His strength was gone. The crowd erupted, a final storm of cheers, drowning the man in judgment. But inside me, I felt the moment stretch, unfinished. The night demanded more than applause. It demanded a closing image, a truth etched in stone. And I knew what I had to do. The hall thundered with applause, but inside the roar there was a silence waiting, an unfinished chord begging for resolution. Wesley stood collapsed against the podium, stripped of charm, stripped of power, nothing left but sweat and trembling hands. The gavel was gone from him, the crowd no longer his, my son no longer his. Yet vengeance, true vengeance, is not in leaving a man broken. It's in sealing the truth so deeply no one can deny it. I walked to the center of the stage, every eye following. The fractured frame lay in splinters across the marble, a relic of arrogance destroyed. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the chain, the old pick, dulled by decades but gleaming now under the chandeliers. The hall went quiet, utterly still. I held it up for all to see. This, I said, voice low but carrying, is what endures. I sold every guitar, every amplifier, every stage light, for love, for my family. I gave away what men like him hoard. And tonight, in this place of money and marble, I give it again, not to be sold, not to be hidden, but to remind us all, sacrifice is the only true art. I knelt and set the pick and chain beside the shattered frame, a mirror of symbols, one born of love, the other of vanity. The contrast was final, undeniable. A hush swept the room like wind before dawn. Then applause erupted. Not the chaotic clapping of earlier, but something deeper, reverent, as if the walls themselves were testifying. Marco stepped forward, tears streaking his face. He placed his hand over mine on the chain, pressing it down into place. This is our family's legacy, he said, loud enough for all to hear. Not shame, not money, love. The hall roared. Collectors stood, clapping until their palms reddened, stomping the marble floor until the chandeliers shook. Some even chanted my name, the sound rolling like a tide. Wesley staggered back, paling under the weight of it all. His lips moved, searching for words, but none came. For the first time that night, his silence spoke louder than mine ever had. He was finished. His mask shattered, his power gone, his humiliation sealed in the memory of everyone present. Ross approached, his hand firm on my shoulder. Justice, he whispered. Not applause, not vengeance, justice. I looked at Marco, and for the first time in years, I saw not the boy ashamed of me, but the man who would carry my name with pride. I pulled him close, and the crowd's cheers softened into something almost sacred. The chandeliers glowed brighter, the fractured frame lying in ruins, the pick gleaming beside it. Two legacies on a marble floor, one destroyed by arrogance, the other immortalized by love. I turned once more to the crowd, my voice steady, final. Remember this night, not for the man who shouted loudest, but for the silence that endured. Art, sacrifice, family, those are the only treasures worth keeping. The ovation surged one last time, a tidal wave of sound. And in that storm, Wesley shrank, vanishing into shadows forgotten. I stood in the light, Marco at my side, the chain resting on stone, and felt the weight lift. Not victory, something greater. Legacy. And in that moment, I knew my silence had finally found its song. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the right.